Hi everyone. We're going to be talking about Chapter 3, which is the Health Information Functions, Purpose, and Users. When we're talking about who the users are for health information, we're talking about the who, what, when, where, and how of patient care. So we're talking about data, information, knowledge, and each one of those gets bigger. So think about data as a single element. So when's your birthday? What what is your sex, male or female? It's a single data element. Information when you have groups of data. So your demographic information is a group of data that identifies where you live. And then knowledge, when you gather up a lot of information, you build knowledge. So if you gather information about an individual's or population of demographic information along with their ICD-10 codes, you might see a trend for that area, if that makes sense. The primary purpose of health record is to have a communication tool about patient care between professionals. The management of patient care assists with developing standards. And then you have the administrative processes, which we're talking about decision support, billing, fiscal health, staffing. Secondary purposes, we're talking about, well, educating each other for healthcare professionals. You're talking about legal accreditation or any kind of policy development. So for instance, when you're looking at Joint Commission and you're utilizing these medical records, this health record and information to get accredited. And you could also be utilizing it for public health and research. So there's different types and formats of the health record. We are still what's known as a hybrid health record. We consist of paper and we have electronic. And technically there are still some institutions that have microfilm. So you have paper, you have electronic, which is anything's digitized or scanned. And because not everything is all electronic or all paper, like I said, we're considered a hybrid and health record. Now we're talking about primary users. Primary users are usually healthcare providers because, again, the primary use of a medical record is a communication tool for patient care. So if you see that correlation. When we're talking about aggregated, we're talking about survival rates of various cancers. That's like pooling information together to do that. You've got the individual patient record, and then you also have de-identification, which is removing anything that can identify a patient and just having, let's say, 38-year-old white female posing with breast cancer. That's generic. You don't know who that's about. You don't know anything else. And that helps with, when you're de-identifying, it helps with, research, for instance. Individual users, there are many individual users. You can have patient care providers. You can have managers, support staff, coding billing staff, patients, employers, especially if it's like a workman's comp issue. You've got lawyers, law enforcement, you've got so many different individual users. Now, institutional users are those that are for a healthcare delivery organization, your insurance, aka third-party payers. You've got medical review organizations to make sure that you're giving the correct care. You've got research organizations again, for purposes of, ensuring what's going on and trending and how to solve um, and, and get a cure for cancer. Educational organizations, Joint Commission is an example of accreditation organization. Government licensing agencies like the Illinois Department of Public Health and any policy-making bodies. Medical transcription and voice recognition is minimally used today, and typically in physicians' offices and in certain departments in hospitals. So transcription is basically the process of a healthcare provider dictating instead of entering into an electronic health record or some software. They are dictating a history and physical. And you've got a transcriptionist that is listening to the voice of that healthcare provider dictate a history and physical, and they're typing every word that that healthcare provider is stating. So they're transcribing, and then they're saving that document, uploading it. The healthcare provider reviews it, signs off on it, and it is permanently saved in the electronic health record. This process can be done with staff from that physician's office, or it can be outsourced to a company that does it. These documents, like I said, are transcribed. There's typically an individual who oversees an entire process, makes sure that the timeliness of the reports are managed and the quality of the reports are there. This is slowly, for those that still don't want to enter directly into the system, there's also what's known as speech recognition. So instead of dictating and then somebody transcribing, you're directly talking, or your speech is being recognized in the electronic health record, and you see, just kind of like Siri when you're, or Google, or Amazon, anybody that listens to your voice, it is recognizing it and typing it out. Release of information is the process of disclosing personal or patient identifiable information. It too can be done by the staff at that location, at that hospital or physician's office, or it can be outsourced to a vendor. Again, there is somebody managing it, whether it's in-house or outsourced, monitoring the quality, turnaround time, any kind of complaints as well. Clinical coding and reimbursement is the process when you're identifying, looking at various rules of why a patient was admitted, what kind of procedures did they have, what are their official diagnoses, and applying codes to that through a complicated but non-complicated process. You also might be in the process of abstracting certain information and entering that in an electronic health record. Then, with this information, billing the health plan or the patient, and there too, there is a coding supervisor that is monitoring the quality of codes, the consistency, as well as the timeliness. Record storage and retrieval. There's still a lot of paper out there in the world. Some institutions have chosen to scan it to eliminate storage fees because they are a research institution, or they're an education healthcare provider. So, for instance, Northwestern is an education type health system. So they're always teaching residents and physicians, and there's a lot of research there. So their records are permanently stored, and it's just a matter of what medium. I believe most of the records have been scanned, or they are in scan on demand, which transitions from paper to electronic. They integrate that document management system into the electronic health record, and still again, they have a hybrid health record because it's not all electronically entered into the EHR. The Master Patient Index, or also known as an MPI, is a permanent record of all the patients treated at that healthcare organization. So from the time the hospital has opened, um, there's going to be basic information that will identify that so-and-so was treated at that hospital. There's different ways of managing it, but everybody gets a unique number. There's like a unique numeric filing system. And if there's multiple hospitals, and I'm going to pick on Northwestern again, they've got Lake Forest, you've got the one downtown, you've got the different medical groups, you've got Valley West, you've got the Huntley Hospital, the Woodstock Hospital. There are so many that are part of Northwestern. Each of them have a unique numbering system, but then all of them kind of feed into one. So a patient has one enterprise master patient index. The EMPI core data elements are listed here, anywhere from identifying the person to the type of admission, to the physician encounter, how they were discharged, all of that is listed. Some of the quality issues that come into play, there can be typographical errors, transposing numbers. There's outdated demographic information. As we know, we're always moving or getting married, changing their names. And there's what's known as a duplicate overlay or overlap. Those are three different ways that there could be an error. And this, just fixing the quality issues of an MPI system is a full-time job. And depending on the size of the institution, there can be multiple people constantly working this, investigating and cleaning it up. So duplicate means that there are two or more medical record numbers for the same patient. Overlay is that there's two different patients with the same medical record number. So the first one, two different medical record numbers for the same patient. The second one, two different patients for the same medical record number. And overlap when you've got two medical record numbers in different systems and they were merged. So there's companies that also come in and do various kind of investigative software analysis and for a large fee to clean up your MPI. So that's what's known as all algorithms that are used. So you've got deterministic, which means an exact. So if X, Y, and Z happens, if Mary Smith with the same date of birth and the same address shows up 5 different times, that's exact, it's deterministic. Probabilistic means that there's some kind of math that then matches and brings up people who could probably be the same. And then you've got rules-based, where there's different assignments of weights to compare. And again, a list will pop up to further investigate and see meeting certain criteria. So like I said, there's still paper-based filing systems. So a physician's office, never a hospital, but physician's office could 9 out of 10 times have an alphabetic filing system. So they file by the patient's first and last name. Technically the last name, then the first name. Majority of the time, a hospital will have a numeric. And typically, again, a very high percentage would be terminal digits. They can also have a straight numeric or an alphanumeric. So a straight numeric, a hospital can have basically chart 1, chart 2, chart 3, and till the end of time. Terminal digit is when you've got 6 numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you have, you file by the last 2, then the middle 2, and the first 2. So it's a slightly different way of doing it. And the reason why it's done is, again, statistically, it spreads out where you create that chart and put that in a physical file room, which again, that is the most popular in a paper-based filing system of a hospital, least popular for a physician's office. Alphanumeric could be utilized in either, but rarely. It's when you get the first digits, let's say, of the last name and some kind of a numbering system after that. And a centralized unit is, again, all of that hospital, every medical record is filed in one location. Paper-based still can utilize filing cabinets or shelving units. Those shelving units can be open or compressible. So what I mean by open is it's basically like just a filing open shelf shelving unit, like those wire shelves, and then you just got records up there. Compressible is when you've got one of those movable shelving units that you have to crank or hit a button. So you would have seen that compressible on that 20-30 minute video introduction of that medical record department for that university. Purging is the process of identifying with predetermined criteria that you are able to pull certain records based on different criteria to open up room in that shelving area. So if you're running out of room and the records are tight, you can go in because you need space, you're going to purge some records. So let's say based on the readmission rate, based on the accessibility or the frequency of that patient visiting, or maybe based on, I'm just going to take out everything from 2019 and only leave the 2020 records on the shelves. So those are different ideas for purging. Paper-based storage is, again, you're scanning a document that is paper-based. You're identifying that document either by patient name, their medical record number, their date of birth, what kind of document it is. There's so many different ways you can index. And then to be able to search by that index. Now, because you're just identifying a picture of a document, you cannot search that document within it. So that's because it is only a picture of a document. The file folder, when it's on a shelf, just like you would have noticed and paid attention to that video, when that woman gave examples of, how the color coding happens and how you're able to find, that's the file folder color coding that I'm referring to right now. Then, also on that video of that medical record department, I think she had microfiche. So there's 3 different kinds of microfilm. You can have roll, jacket, or fiche. So all 3 of those, roll is when you've got a continuous roll of film that kind of cranks in through a specific reader so that it blows up and you can read what's on that film. Jacket is what they showed you. Each individual patient has a fiche in a jacket, and their medical record is all on these little bitty, tiny 5% views of documents that were filmed, taken a picture of. And then you've got the fiche, which again, multiple imaged records that are there. Offsite storage is when a vendor or commercial company or even a healthcare organization like a hospital basically take all of their paper records, box them up, and give it somewhere else other than the main medical record department. So it could be at a warehouse facility, Or, like I said, it can be given to a vendor um, to store at their location. And anytime you need it, you either go to there to pull that record if it's your storage facility, or you contact the vendor, that commercial company, and request records to be sent over to you. It is important to protect these records. So Joint Commission does have an IDPH and OSHA have a lot of regulations that need to be followed, whether you as a healthcare organization house them somewhere or a vendor does. There's sprinkler systems, there's certain inches off the floor, um, there's privacy, security, there's the capability of limiting who has access to these records. There's a lot of information. So here in this example, you can't just put it in one of those pod storage containers and then leave it outside the hospital because it's not protected. If it catches on fire, you're losing original information. You can't put it in somebody's garage or somebody's basement because it's an access and a privacy issue. And again, it's not protected properly. So there are many different rules about offsite storage. Retrieval and tracking, this is very nominal and doesn't really exist very much. So I'm going to skip over OutGuide. Loose material, meaning the original record is there, and then later there were miscellaneous documents. The physician forgot to create a history and physical, and that kind of comes in later. So when you get those loose material, you have to file it into the medical record. I'm going to skip over requisition because that doesn't really exist anymore, and as well as chart tracking system. I think I think it would be hard to find that there's a chart tracking system, but when hospitals and physicians' offices were 100% paper, the chart tracking, the OutGuide told you, well, the chart tracking system would capture who's requesting a medical record. The requisition would print in the medical records department that, let's say, Dr. Smith wants a chart, and the OutGuide, once a medical record clerk would pull the record, the OutGuide would stay in that place to mark who's requesting it and who did this record go to. And the chart tracking system checks in and checks out all that information. So it's really important that you have, you're organized, knowing where all the paper medical records are, what years you have. Each individual medical record needs to be indexed and identified. So if you're looking for it, you know exactly where it is or who has it. There's a lot of standards that need to be met. When you go to destroy, you get a certificate that that you authorized a certain destruction and a certain records to be destroyed, and each individual record is listed so that if an attorney ever asks, prove to me that you've destroyed this record, you have something that you can show that on this date, Mary Smith's records from 2019 were destroyed. Assembly and analysis, again, in this electronic world is very minimal. Analysis is still there. I shouldn't say that. Assembly. When the paper medical records came down from the units, a medical records clerk would assemble the record. So on the unit, it would be opposite of the most recent documentation would be on top. So when a physician would come to the unit and open up a binder, the most recent record was on top for them to document and review to see what's going on. When that binder, when a patient got discharged, that binder of information for that visit would come down to medical records, and they would assemble it in book order. So from the time that the patient was admitted to the time that the patient was discharged. So it's a reverse chronological order in the book format. An analysis is quantitative and qualitative, and that basically tracks, and quantitative can be concurrent or retrospective. So, do you have everything? Do you have every single record? And then, is every single document that's expected in this record signed off and dated and complete? And concurrent versus retrospective mean concurrent while the patient is still in the hospital. Somebody could be doing this to do it in real time. Retrospective is after the patient was discharged, then you're reviewing it and marking it off. What's also important to realize is when you're monitoring completion, before there was a deficiency slip that was given to physicians because the records were incomplete or they were delinquent. So they're incomplete for the first 30 days after a patient was discharged. They become delinquent after the 30 days per Joint Commission rules. So anytime a signature is needed, anytime that there is a blank in a dictated report, if there was an operation but the physician hasn't dictated or completed an operative report, all of these would require a deficiency slip. Now in the electronic world, that is all monitored, and there is no deficiency slip, but it's monitored and checked off in the EHR. So in the paper world, once there was a correction, addendum, or amendment, you would draw through that incorrect statement or word, write error, and sign and date it with a time correction. And you can also write whatever the correct word is. If there needed to be, if it was too much to write, then an addendum was dictated or written with a date of addendum signed and timed. And also an amendment, anytime there was an amendment, it would have been dated, timed, and signed. Again, this is all as a reminder to the paper medical record. Forms design to this day for anything that is created on paper is really important. There's a lot of standardization, and there were forms committees to this day that are being utilized. And those forms were somewhat recreated in an electronic world, but it was a lot of standardization. So if there was a hospital logo, it was always placed in a certain location, in a certain size, in a certain color. Anytime a patient was identified, it was, or a medical record number, or an account number, or a date of service, all of that information was always in the same spot, the same font. Duplication was minimized so that if physical therapy and occupational therapy were capturing similar information, they tried to condense the forms so that a multidisciplinary therapy can be administered and be pretty consistent. So like I mentioned, there was a forms committee, and the forms committee, you had multidisciplinaries reflected in this committee, along with medical records. And it was to identify every single form and give it a number and have a master spreadsheet that identify who owned that form, what does it contain, when was it last revised, how was it identified. So any new form that would come in would have to be identified and evaluated by this committee to see if it was already existing in other forms or does this warrant a new form. So like I said, it needed to have a unique form identification number, date created, revised, the title, facility name, logo, patient identification, and where was there going to be a signature line. If ideally it needed to have barcodes in a certain location, again, Does not have to be in the upper corner, but it has to be consistently in one location. Always use black ink on white paper, sufficient space to write. Um, and like I said, clinical forms committee, it was always interdisciplinary and it was all about standardizing forms. And then through this process, again, there was a database, the quality of paper, how it was going to be tested, tracking, all that was done by this committee. And the whole purpose was to evaluate that, again, there was no duplication of effort. With quality control in the paper world, there were a lot of standards that were established. But important was monitoring, constant monitoring of missed files. That's why you have the color-coded folders, the timeliness of storage and retrieval. So again, when a physician asked for a record, how fast did they get that record? How long do you have to store? And finally, how fast that paper record was completed to make sure it was the most accurate possible in preparation for being evaluated by Joint Commission and other accrediting agencies. Now, in the electronic environment, which is what we are mostly in now, and like I said, not 100%, you're reducing storage of the paper records. So you're not, you don't have that physical space anymore. You're eliminating vendors from storing your paper records because you're slowly destroying or scanning those records. In the electronic environment, now if you can see who's looked at it. So if you think about it, if you've got a whole file room of paper records, yes, you can control that file room and the access of who goes in there, but you would never know who's looked at what document unless you fingerprinted everything, but you would never know what they looked at. In the electronic world, everything that you do is monitored and captured in an audit trail. Any paper records that are scanned, they're also indexed, and as long as they're indexed appropriately, they can be found. Health record completion is more automated, and now what's known as work queues. So when there's something that needs to be done, there's a process, and they just go from queue to queue to queue. And then that's what we all work from now, our queues, whether it's a coding queue, whether it's a release of information queue, if it's an analysis queue, billing queue, all of those are all created with queues in the electronic world. In the electronic environment, you have version control. So every little amendment or correction is going to be tracked. There's very minimal free text areas, and ideally everything should be structured data. Now, if you recall, structured data is important because you can run reports on structured data. You can't run reports on free text. So every time you have that single data element of, let's say, asking whether you're a male or a female, and if you, in the system, it says M or F, or in these days, obviously, there are more options with the transgender environment, but simply sticking to a easy example, if you're male or female, in a structured data element, you're choosing M or F. In a free text, if we left it free text, then we can have people writing out male, writing out female, writing out neither, creating their own selections, putting M versus F, putting two letters, FE versus MA, all these different options. In structured data, you can run reports because you can say, show me all the M's, show me all the F's. In free text, you would not be able to do that. And you could, but you wouldn't be able to capture all the things that were outside of that area. In the electronic environment, the key area that is really, I guess, important but scary is the copy and paste functionality. Physicians, as well as whoever is working in electronic health record, is very tempted, like we all are when we're working in Word, to copy and paste. So, oh, I'm a radiologist. This is a standard x-ray for a broken or sprained ankle. So I'm just going to copy and paste from a previous one and paste here and just change it. So it's really important that if the radiologist doesn't read through everything and alter everything, it's really easy to miss something. And then now all of a sudden in one document or one post or entry in the electronic health record, you have a sprain or a strain, or a sprain and a break. And the inconsistency of that information can compromise the patient's treatment if not caught. So again, you can have digital dictation where you've got a doctor recording their voice, a transcriptionist transcribing it. You've got speech recognition where the doctor is utilizing natural language processing and seeing their words that they're dictating appear in a report. Reconciliation is just making sure that once you've dictated that, you can have a transcriptionist just do a QA on it, and then making sure that everything was dictated and captured. In the electronic environment also, what do you capture if you're a physician's office or a healthcare provider? All emails should have the capability, when there's communication between a healthcare provider and a patient, should be captured in an EHR. Voicemail messages, other outside ancillary devices, medical devices like EKGs, blood pressure monitoring kits, etc., all need to be incorporated in an electronic environment. You also are constantly receiving materials from other healthcare organizations. So if I'm being transferred from Northwestern and I'm going to Lutheran General Hospital, some of those records are coming with me, whether electronically or via paper, with the patient and going to the new the new healthcare organization. In the electronic environment, because we're capturing so much more information, it's electronic, it's so much easier to search, retrieve, and manipulate health data so that you can have really good information about your patient population. Amendments and corrections are so much easier to do. Nothing is ever deleted, it is always tracked and maybe hidden. So in the scanning, in the quality control, when we're talking about data entry and scanning, scanning is just taking a picture of that document. It's digitizing it. By utilizing data entry, which is manual identification of the patient or the form, barcodes are reading Q codes or barcodes like what's on food labels, to capture the information that's in there a lot faster, so you're not doing manual data entry. Or you can have transfer of data from, let's say, an MPI into another system. There are various different quality controls when you're doing data entry. So when you have an input mask, what that means is, in the scenario that I gave you earlier about the sex of a person, whether it's male or female, when you have structured data, you can have a drop down, or you can only enter, let's say, an M or an F. And if you want to enter any other letter, it prevents you from doing that. The drop down is, again, the two options that you have in that field. A checkbox, I think you understand what that is, and a radio button is the circular versus a box with a check mark. The radio button is the circular that you click on and you've got the solid between. So all those control and limit and enhance quality. The screen design, based on where your buttons are, where the information is consistently, limiting abbreviations, and creating alerts and references, all helps in the capturing of electronic information and speeds up the data entry. So if you have to go through numerous screens and go, oh, I have to go to this screen to enter it here, then I have to back up to enter it here, is not user friendly. So the screen design for the eyes, the color scheme, where everything's located, when you hit tab, you go to the next field, all that is very important. So again, the ultimate is to minimize strokes, making sure you're putting the data in the appropriate field. It's predefined lists, and you're only entering something that belongs there. So circling back to identification systems, you've got the health record number, or a medical record number, is a unique identifier. Each person has a unique medical record number. In the paper-based health record, you've got all these different types of ways of filing and identifying that medical record number and that patient. In the electronic health record, you've got unit numbering, where you've got one unique health record number for each patient, and you can have various patient counts. So for every visit, you can have a unique visit number or a date of service, but it's all under one medical record number. There are other HIM functions that you might have, again, seen or hinted in that video that you saw, but you've got statistics. So again, you can be focusing on statistics for HIM and doing a lot of quality reporting. You can be part of research. You can be capturing registry information, and there can be birth and death certificates. And we're going to cover the registry's birth and death certificates a little bit later in our topics in our book. You can also be working with other departments when it comes to patient care, information governance, which again we'll cover a little bit more deeply later on, quality management, billing, and patient registration. There is a very high relationship and a lot of information partnering when you're dealing with patient registration. So anytime somebody enters and registers a patient wrong, medical records is typically who catches it and works with patient registration to get it corrected and give training. Billing department, that could be an interrelation conversation between patient and medical records. Patient care departments, what information is needed when it comes to coding, the right documents, the right information, quality information, working with IT or information systems so that you're accessing and have the right access to all the software that you need. Quality management to make sure all the reporting and the monitoring of turnaround times of incomplete records, for release of information, for coding, all of that. And of course, even before COVID-19, there was already becoming a virtual HIM department, but now even more so. So coding, transcription, and analysis, all of those have been able to be done more virtually. There are various information systems that are utilized in the Health Information Management Department. In that video that you watched, release of information was introduced to you. Chart tracking, I kind of presented to you today. Coding, was introduced on the video, and you might have been exposed to that. An encoder is used. Various registries, so state, federal reporting registries, billing to be able to track and bill and invoice, and quality improvement so that you can again report to various agencies what the quality improvements are, process improvements. You also have an electronic health record in EHR, and you also have personal health records, which is when you, the patient, has the capability and the software to collect all your records electronically, have them at your fingertips, and you store them, which is a duplication of what's in the electronic health record at all the facilities that you visited. So this concludes chapter 3.